Once upon a time, in a land torn between kings and idols, there lived a man who feared only God. His name was Obadiah. He didn't wear armor. He didn't carry scrolls. But he had a secret, a big one, and it lived deep inside a cave, behind a curtain of vines and silence. The cave was cold that morning, damp, hidden. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the rocks above. Obadiah knelt near a small fire, blowing gently on a twig bundle to keep the flames alive. Behind him, in the shadows of the stone walls, 100 people slept. Prophets, the ones King Ahab wanted dead. The ones Queen Jezebel hunted with rage in her eyes and blood on her hands. Obadiah kept them alive, in secret, bread at night, water by day, quiet footsteps, careful words, always watching, always listening. He had done this for months. No one in the royal palace knew, not even his wife, not even Elijah, just Obadiah. One of the young prophets stirred. "Is it morning already?" the boy asked, rubbing his eyes. Obadiah smiled. "Only barely. Do we have to stay inside again?" "For now." The boy frowned. "Why do they want to kill us?" Obadiah's face darkened. "Because you speak the truth, and truth makes wicked people nervous." The boy didn't understand. Not yet. But he would. Obadiah stood, brushing the dirt from his robe. He looked at the faces, some young, some old, all brave, all hiding. He whispered, "Just a little longer, Lord. Keep them breathing. I'll do the rest." Outside the cave, the sun rose gold over the hills of Israel. Obadiah stepped carefully over rocks, pulling his hood low. The world above was dangerous. But he had a job. He was the chief steward of King Ahab, the same king who worshipped Baal, who married a queen that silenced prophets, who built altars to false gods while the land cracked with drought. Obadiah worked inside the very house that wanted to destroy his people, but no one suspected him, because Obadiah had learned to smile and stay quiet. As he reached the edge of the wilderness trail, he muttered to himself, "Keep your head down, Obadiah. Keep your heart up." And with that, he vanished into the dust, a servant of the wicked king, with the secrets of heaven in his hands. The palace gates groaned open as Obadiah stepped through, robes dusty, heart pounding beneath layers of calm. Stone lions guarded the entrance, tall and gold and silent. Their eyes never blinked. Their teeth never dulled. Neither did Jezebel's. Obadiah kept his head low, but his eyes sharp. Every step he took into the royal court was like walking a tightrope across fire. One wrong move, one wrong word, and he wouldn't just die. The prophets in the cave would die too. Inside, the air was cooler, shaded by high walls and polished floors. Purple curtains billowed slightly from the breeze. Incense floated from golden bowls, but it didn't cover the stink of fear. A group of servants passed him, whispering. A soldier leaned against a pillar, sharpening his blade with the kind of patience that made Obadiah's stomach tighten. He walked past them like he belonged, because he did. That was the terrifying part. He was Ahab's chief steward. He managed the palace stores. He handled orders. He even poured the king's wine with a steady hand and a silent prayer. Obadiah. He froze. The voice came from above, smooth, sharp, and always watching. Queen Jezebel. She stood on the upper steps, wrapped in crimson silk, a crown glinting on her forehead and cruelty dancing in her eyes. "Yes, my queen," Obadiah said, bowing low. She studied him for a long moment. "I've heard rumors." Obadiah's blood went cold. He kept his face still. "What kind, my lady?" Her fingers slid down the rail as she descended slowly. "Some say a few of the prophets escaped the executions, that they're still breathing, hiding in caves, eating bread." She stopped inches from him. "Strange, isn't it?" Obadiah's throat tightened. "Very strange." She circled him once, like a lion inspecting prey. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" she purred. He looked her in the eyes and lied. "No, my queen." She watched him longer, then smiled, too sweet, too wide. "Of course not. You're loyal." She turned with a swish of fabric and vanished down the hall. Obadiah let out a breath only once she was gone. In the next chamber, King Ahab lounged on a wide ivory throne, fanning himself with boredom. When he saw Obadiah, he waved lazily. "We have a problem." "Yes, Your Majesty." "This drought. It's ruining everything. No crops, no wine. My horses are coughing." He leaned forward, annoyed. "I want you to go. Find grass, water. I don't care where. Just keep my royal herds alive." Obadiah bowed. "Yes, my king." "Take a few men. Search every stream, every valley." Obadiah nodded. "And if we find nothing?" "Then we burn the goats," Ahab muttered, "and pray to Baal harder." Obadiah said nothing, because deep in his heart he knew. Baal hadn't sent the drought. God had. That evening, Obadiah stood on a balcony overlooking the land. Cracked soil, wilted trees, birds flying low in desperate search of water. He whispered into the wind, "Lord, you see all of this. You know what I'm doing. Just let me finish it. Don't let Jezebel find them. Not yet." Behind him, the palace windows flickered with torchlight. Laughter rang from a banquet hall, wine spilling like water they no longer had. But Obadiah didn't move. He stayed on the balcony long after the moon rose. A man who worked in the palace of a wicked king, but belonged to a much higher throne. The sun was already high when Obadiah stepped out into the wilderness. Dust clung to his sandals. The wind kicked grit into his eyes. The earth, once green and alive, was now brittle, silent, cracked wide open like it had been cursed. Because it had. 3 years. 3 long, bone-dry years without a single drop of rain. Ahab's orders echoed in his head. "Find grass. Find water. Or we lose everything." He rode alone, away from the soldiers, away from the eyes. If there was grass left, it would be in the secret places, along dried-up riverbeds, behind boulders, inside canyons the sun hadn't swallowed yet. But that wasn't all he was looking for. Not really. Obadiah's eyes scanned the horizon, watching the hills, because part of him still believed, or hoped, that maybe the drought would break the silence, that maybe God would speak again. Hours passed, no grass, no water, just heat and silence and dust. Until dash, a flicker. Far off, near a ridge, a figure standing still. Too still for a shepherd, too calm for a thief. Obadiah slowed his horse. His heartbeat kicked up. He squinted through the light, sand brushing against his cheek. The figure stepped forward. Long hair, weathered robe, fire in his eyes. Obadiah gasped. "Elijah?" For a second, he thought he was dreaming. Elijah, the prophet, had disappeared the day the drought began, gone without a trace. Some said Jezebel killed him. Others said the wind had swallowed him. But here he was, alive, real, and standing in the middle of a dying land like he belonged to it. Obadiah dismounted and fell to one knee. "My lord Elijah, is it truly you?" Elijah nodded. "It is." Obadiah looked around, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't be here. If Jezebel finds out—" "She won't," Elijah said. "Not yet." Obadiah stood slowly, eyes wide. "Why now?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "Because the time has come." He paused, then added, "Go tell your master. Elijah is back." Obadiah froze. He looked over his shoulder like the rocks themselves might be listening. No, I can't do that." Elijah's brow furrowed. "Why not?" "Because if I tell him and you vanish again, he'll kill me," Obadiah said. "I work in the palace, remember? I keep your people alive. I hide prophets in caves. If I disappear, they'll be found." Elijah stepped closer. His voice was calm, strong. "As the Lord Almighty lives, I will show myself to Ahab. I give you my word." Obadiah searched his face, then nodded. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Then may the Lord protect us both." He turned toward the horizon, knowing that when he reached the palace gates, everything would change. Because Elijah was back, and God was ready to speak, not in secret this time, not in whispers, but in fire. The ride back to the palace felt longer. Obadiah's horse kicked up clouds of dust behind him, but he barely noticed. His hands were tight on the reins. His mind was racing. "Tell Ahab Elijah is back." That command echoed over and over again. Every step closer to the palace, the more dangerous it felt. Because Ahab wasn't just desperate. He was furious. And Jezebel, she didn't wait for trials. She simply ordered executions. Obadiah knew that delivering this message might be the last thing he ever did. But Elijah had spoken with fire in his voice. And somehow, Obadiah believed him. By the time the palace walls came into view, his robe was soaked with sweat. He walked through the outer gates like he had 1,000 times before, but this time, everything was different. The guards at the entrance gave him a lazy salute. One of the kitchen boys smiled and waved. A court scribe asked him if he'd found any grass. He said nothing. Straight through the hallways, past the golden statues, past the altar to Baal, past the eyes that watched, always watching, until finally he stood before the throne. King Ahab sat slouched in frustration, gnawing on a pomegranate seed. He looked up when Obadiah entered. "Well," the king snapped, "tell me you found water." Obadiah didn't flinch. "I found something better." Ahab narrowed his eyes. "Speak." Obadiah stepped forward and said clearly, "Elijah has returned." The room went silent. Even the servants froze mid-step. Ahab slowly stood, eyes wide. "What did you say?" "Elijah is back," Obadiah repeated. "He waits for you in the valley." The king's jaw clenched. His voice dropped into a growl. "Where?" Obadiah met his eyes. "South of the Kishon Brook, he said to meet him." Ahab stared at him like he was trying to see through the truth. Then he barked to his guards, "Prepare the chariots." He turned to Obadiah. "If you're lying, I'm not." "Then may your prophet burn," Ahab hissed, because I'm done waiting for his God to show up." As Ahab stormed out, Jezebel appeared at the edge of the hall, her eyes fixed on Obadiah. She said nothing, just stared. Like a viper deciding whether to strike. Obadiah held her gaze, heart pounding. He had done his part. He had obeyed. And if this was the end, so be it. But deep in his soul, he felt something strange. Peace. Because after all the hiding, the running, the whispering, truth was walking back into the open. Obadiah didn't follow right away. He stood frozen in the palace courtyard long after Ahab had stormed off, the king's footsteps still echoing against the stone. Jezebel was gone. The guards had moved. The scribes returned to their chatter. But Obadiah stood still, because he knew. The world had just shifted. The name Elijah was a spark on dry wood, and Obadiah had just lit the match. Later that day, Obadiah rode out behind the king's caravan, not close enough to be seen, not far enough to be forgotten. He moved along the side trails, eyes sharp, heart pounding, watching the royal banners flap ahead of him like thunderclouds in silk. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. He hadn't told the prophets in the cave. He didn't even tell his wife. This moment was too sacred, too risky, too full of fire. He needed to see for himself. By the time he reached the valley of Kishon, the sky had started to change. Dark clouds crept across the horizon like ink spilled from heaven's edge. The ground crunched beneath his feet as he climbed a ridge overlooking the meeting place. He crouched low behind a rocky outcrop, hidden, but with a clear view. Below him, Elijah stood alone, just like always. No armor, no sword, just robes tugging in the wind and the presence of something larger standing behind his eyes. On the other side, Ahab approached in his chariot, lined in gold, pulled by 2 tired horses. His guards flanked him, faces tight with suspicion. The king climbed down. Obadiah could just barely hear the words as they echoed off the canyon walls. "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" Elijah didn't blink. "I am no troubler," he said. "You are. You abandoned the Lord's commands. You follow Baal." Obadiah gripped the rocks beside him. He'd heard Elijah speak before, but never like this. Not with the weight of heaven behind every syllable. Below, Elijah stepped forward, voice rising. "Gather the people, all of them. Meet me on Mount Carmel. Bring the prophets of Baal, every last one. We settle this now." Ahab didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. He turned sharply, shouted to his guards, and rode off into the distance. Elijah stayed, eyes to the clouds. Still, waiting. Obadiah sat back, breathless. The wind picked up, tugging his hood back. He looked at the sky, how fast it was changing. It hadn't rained in years, but something was building. Something bigger than drought, bigger than kings, something divine. That evening, Obadiah returned to the cave. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He simply handed a loaf of bread to a young prophet and said, "Get rest. Tomorrow, everything changes." The boy looked up, confused. Why? Obadiah's eyes were far away. Because Elijah's not hiding anymore. Far away, on Mount Carmel, the clouds rolled in. Not with water yet, but with promise. Because tomorrow, fire would fall, and Obadiah would be there to see it. Not as a servant of Ahab, but as a witness of the God who answers. Morning came, like a warning bell. Thunder rumbled far off, low and slow, like a lion just beginning to wake. Obadiah stood on the lower ridge of Mount Carmel, his cloak whipped by the wind. He wasn't supposed to be here. No one had invited him, but he had to see it. He had hidden God's prophets. Now, for the first time in years, one of them would speak aloud. All of Israel was gathering. Tens of thousands of people climbed the slopes. Merchants, soldiers, shepherds, priests, mothers with babies on their hips. No one dared stay home. Word had spread like wildfire. Elijah was back, and he had challenged Baal. Obadiah kept to the side, hood pulled low, eyes scanning the faces. He saw priests of Baal in fine robes, prophets of Asherah with painted faces and smug grins. He saw Jezebel's spies lurking like shadows along the edges, and then, at the summit, he saw Elijah, standing alone. No weapons, no army, just fire in his eyes and dust on his feet. Elijah raised one hand, and the noise fell quiet like a blanket dropped across a field. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He simply turned slowly, letting every person see his face. Then he said, "How long will you waver between two opinions?" The people said nothing. "If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him." Still silence. Elijah nodded once. "Very well. Let's settle it." He pointed to the 450 prophets of Baal who had gathered around their ornate altar. "We each prepare a sacrifice, but we don't light it. We pray, and whichever God answers by fire, he is God." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Obadiah swallowed hard. This was no trick, no clever argument. This was war, with no swords, just fire. The prophets of Baal went first. They danced. They shouted. They chanted ancient spells, cutting themselves with knives until the ground was slick with blood. Nothing happened. No fire. No sound. Just wind. Just silence. Hour after hour. Elijah leaned on his staff and watched. At one point, he even called out, "Shout louder! Maybe Baal's asleep or busy or on a trip." The crowd laughed nervously, but still, no fire came. Obadiah's heart pounded. He could barely breathe. This was dangerous, not just politically, but spiritually. If Elijah failed, they'd kill him, and the people would never believe again. Finally, at sunset, Elijah stood. The prophets of Baal collapsed from exhaustion. Elijah called for 12 stones. He stacked them in the shape of an altar, one stone for each tribe of Israel. He dug a trench around it. He placed the wood, laid the sacrifice, and then he did something mad. He called for water. "Pour it over everything," he said. They did. Again. They did. Again. The trench overflowed. The wood was soaked. The entire altar looked like a drowned offering. Obadiah whispered aloud, "What are you doing, Elijah?" Elijah stepped forward. No dancing, no shouting, just a prayer. "O Lord, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that everything I've done was by your word." He lifted his hands to heaven. "Answer me, Lord, so these people will know and turn their hearts back again." The sky cracked, not with rain, but with fire. It came down like a strike of glory, roaring, blinding, hotter than the sun. The fire consumed the sacrifice, consumed the wood, consumed the stones, even licked up the water. And the people? They fell to the ground in waves like wheat under wind, shouting, "The Lord! He is God! The Lord! He is God!" Obadiah dropped to his knees, tears in his eyes, hands trembling, because he had spent years feeding prophets in caves. And now, for the first time, he saw God answer in the open. Not in whispers, not in shadows, but in fire. The fire was still burning in their eyes, even after it vanished from the sky. Even after the altar had turned to ash, Obadiah had never seen a crowd change so fast. The people who used to bow at Baal's altars now wept in the dirt. Some shouted, some just stared. All of them knew. The Lord, He was God. No one could argue with fire. Elijah didn't wait. He turned to the soldiers standing by and said, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let one escape." And they didn't. That day, the prophets who had led the nation into darkness were wiped away, cleansed from the mountain like dust in a flood. Obadiah watched it all from the ridge. And though his heart should have felt light, it didn't. Because he knew who wasn't there: Jezebel. By the next morning, the sky broke open, rain, pouring, wild, unstoppable rain. Obadiah stood outside the cave entrance, arms lifted as heaven wept across the land. The drought was over. The land was drinking again, but deep inside, his stomach twisted. He had seen the way Elijah sprinted down Mount Carmel in victory, and he had also seen the look on Ahab's face as he returned home to his queen. Obadiah knew what was coming. Jezebel would not fall to her knees. Jezebel would not bow. She would rise in fury, and she would send death with her words. By sundown, the rumors had begun. Servants in the palace whispering. A letter had been sent, not to the people, to Elijah. Obadiah didn't need to see it. He already knew what it said. By this time tomorrow, you will be like one of the prophets you destroyed. A threat, a curse, a death sentence signed with royal venom. Obadiah paced the garden walls, his heart racing. He'd seen Elijah call down fire. He'd seen a nation repent. But now, Elijah was running. The man of God, who once stood alone on a mountain, was now hiding in the desert. Obadiah slammed his fist against the stone. This isn't how it's supposed to end. A young boy from the palace stables came up behind him. "Sir?" Obadiah turned, startled. The boy held a small sack. "It's food. For Elijah. He left it behind." Obadiah took the sack in both hands, stared at it for a long time. He didn't cry, but his shoulders dropped, because the man who once stood alone had to walk alone again. He didn't know where Elijah would go. He didn't know what Jezebel would do next. But he did know this: the battle wasn't over. The fire proved who God was. But now Obadiah had to decide. Would he keep walking in the shadows, or would he carry the flame? The palace looked the same. The floors still gleamed. The columns still stood. The torches still burned. But everything felt cracked. Obadiah moved carefully through the stone halls, nodding to servants who avoided his eyes. The laughter that once echoed through the throne room was gone. Now, every whisper felt like a warning. Every shadow stretched longer than it should, because Jezebel was angry. And when Jezebel was angry, people disappeared. That morning, Obadiah stood by the eastern courtyard when he saw her. She didn't walk. She glided, like a storm wrapped in silk. Her crown sat lower than usual. Her eyes were darker. She passed by 2 guards and didn't even glance at them. They stepped back like she carried fire in her bones. She stopped near Obadiah. "Where is he?" she said. Obadiah bowed. "Who, my queen?" She leaned close. "Elijah." He kept his face calm. "I do not know." "Liar," she hissed. He met her eyes and said nothing. That silence was the most dangerous thing he'd done all day. She stepped back slowly, smiling, too calmly. "Well, if you see him again," she said, "tell him fire wasn't enough." Then she turned and vanished like smoke through the hall. Obadiah didn't breathe again until he was alone. When he reached the inner quarters, he opened a chest and pulled out a cloth bundle. Inside were supplies, bread, oil, and a tiny scroll of scriptures tucked inside a wax pouch. He gave it to the stable boy. "No names," Obadiah whispered. "No questions. Ride fast. Ride far. Leave it by the broom tree." The boy nodded. He didn't ask who it was for, but Obadiah saw it in his eyes. He knew. Later that night, Obadiah walked the stone corridors and stopped outside a side door that led to the royal gardens. 2 guards stood nearby. He leaned against the pillar and looked up at the sky. "Lord," he whispered, "I've done what I could. I fed your prophets. I kept the caves hidden. I stood in the court of evil for years." He paused. "But I don't know if I can keep standing." The wind blew softly through the olive trees. No answer, no fire, just the stars. But something about that silence felt holy. Obadiah placed one hand on the wall and nodded to himself. "I'll stay a little longer." Because Elijah had run, the fire had fallen, but Jezebel still ruled. And now, it was Obadiah's turn to burn quietly, faithfully, inside the lion's den. And he wasn't finished yet. Obadiah didn't sleep much anymore. The palace never truly rested. Even at midnight, servants whispered, guards shuffled in their armor, torches sputtered along cold stone walls like nervous breath. But this night felt different. Too quiet, too slow. Like something was moving in the dark, something that didn't want to be seen. At dawn, Obadiah left the palace through a back corridor, his steps quick but measured. He passed through the lower courtyards, through the spice storerooms, and out the service gate. The cave was a 2-hour walk away. He had taken the path 100 times, every step memorized, every turn familiar. But today, the birds didn't sing. Even the wind felt cautious. When he reached the boulder that marked the hidden passage, he paused. The vines had been moved, not torn, not broken, just shifted. Like someone had brushed past them and tried to put them back. His heart thudded once, hard. He crouched low, listening. No voices, no movement. He crept through the narrow stone path, the walls cold against his shoulders. The entrance to the main chamber yawned open in front of him like a sleeping mouth. And then he saw them. Eyes staring back. Wide, alert, afraid, prophets, alive, still here, but someone had definitely been nearby. Obadiah pulled the youngest prophet aside. "Did anyone come?" The boy shook his head. "No one we saw, but the goat never returned this morning, and we heard voices above the ridge, 2 men." "Guards?" "We couldn't tell." Obadiah nodded slowly. This was it. The caves weren't secret anymore. That night he sat at the cave's edge with a flickering torch in his hand. He looked out at the stars just like he always did, but this time he spoke louder. "Lord, if they find this place, they'll kill them all, every last one." No fire fell, no thunder answered, but something stirred in his chest. "I gave you this assignment, and I haven't left you yet." Obadiah wiped his face with his sleeve. He stood, looked back into the cave. There were 100 souls inside, men with faith like flame, men who couldn't leave unless he told them, unless he risked everything. He turned to the boy again. "Pack what you can carry, quietly, before dawn." The boy blinked. "Where will we go?" Obadiah's eyes were hard now, focused. "We'll scatter them. 10 here, 10 there. Move them across the hills." "But Jezebel, she won't catch what she can't find." Before sunrise, Obadiah slipped back into the palace like a ghost, tired, dirty, but determined. Because Jezebel might rule from a throne, but she didn't own obedience. And as long as Obadiah could breathe, he would protect the voices of God, even if it meant his own would one day go silent. The message came before sunrise. Not a trumpet, not a scroll, just a voice in the shadows. "The queen wants you," the servant whispered, eyes darting like a mouse near a hawk. "Now!" Obadiah didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He just dressed in silence, smoothed his robe, and prayed the words that had carried him for years. "God of truth, help me speak without fear." Then he walked, through halls that suddenly felt too narrow, past guards who looked at him too long, into a throne room that had never felt more dangerous. Jezebel stood at the far end, not seated, not smiling, standing, hands clasped, eyes fixed, robes trailing like blood across the floor. The court was smaller than usual. Only a few advisors, no King Ahab. This wasn't a public summons. This was a trap in royal clothing. "Obadiah," she said. He bowed. "My queen." She circled him slowly, her voice smooth as poured oil. "You've served this palace for many years." "I have." "You've kept the storerooms full, the records clean, the halls orderly." "I've done what was asked." She stopped in front of him, too close. "And yet," she said softly, "you've also kept secrets." Obadiah's mouth went dry, but he didn't flinch. She tilted her head. "The prophets, the ones we never found, you know where they are, don't you?" The room held its breath. Obadiah answered calmly, "I know the Lord has many servants. Some are seen, some are not." A flicker of anger flashed in her eyes. "You speak in riddles." "No, my queen," he said, meeting her gaze. "I speak carefully." She stepped back. Her lips tightened. "You were seen near the Kishon Valley the night before the fire." "I was." "Did you help Elijah?" "I serve the king." She snapped. "I didn't ask who you serve publicly." Silence. She stepped closer again, her voice now ice. "If I find out you've been protecting the enemies of Baal, I will burn your name from the records, from the land, from memory." Obadiah's jaw tightened. "You can burn scrolls," he said, "but you can't erase truth." The room went still. One of her guards shifted uneasily. Jezebel smiled, not because she was pleased, but because she had made her decision. "Then let's see what truth survives," she said. She waved her hand. "Leave him!" Obadiah turned without another word and walked out. Alive. For now. As he stepped into the sunlight outside, he exhaled slowly. He had spoken carefully, boldly. Not everything, not yet. But he had stood. And sometimes standing was the loudest sermon of all. The message came at dusk. A boy no older than 10, barefoot, out of breath, slipped into Obadiah's storage chamber and tugged at his robe. "They found one," he whispered. "The Upper Ridge Cave. 4 were taken." Obadiah closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't ask how the queen found them. He already knew. Spies. He'd scattered the prophets too late. Jezebel was moving faster now, cutting deeper, and time was slipping through his fingers like sand in a storm. That night, he returned to the ridge. He didn't take a horse. He didn't carry a sword, just bread, a water skin, and a single torch. The stars overhead blinked like they were watching. He climbed through thorns and stone, heart pounding. At the cave entrance, the other prophets waited, 10 of them, wide-eyed, quiet. One man stepped forward. "Obadiah, what do we do?" He looked at them, dust-covered, worn, and terrified, and he remembered. He remembered when he used to be terrified too, back before the fire, back before the rain, back before Elijah stood on the mountain and shouted for God. He lifted the torch, held it high. "We move again," he said. "We split in twos. You go north, toward Gilead. Stay low, stay light. If you're asked who you are, say nothing. Just keep walking." A young prophet spoke up. "And you?" Obadiah met his eyes. "I go back. Back. To the palace." A pause. "You can't. She'll kill you." Obadiah looked down, the dark slope, toward the distant glow of the city. "I know." Another voice called out. "Then why go?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone has to stay behind the gate." Later that night, as they disappeared one by one into the hills, Obadiah sat alone by the cave's edge. He lit a small fire and opened the scroll he kept tucked in his robe. Not a law, not a command, just one line he had written years ago in his own hand. "Fear the Lord more than the fire." He folded it, stood, and walked back toward the flames of Jezebel's palace, because sometimes God doesn't send fire from heaven. Sometimes he sends someone into the fire to carry light from the inside, and Obadiah was ready to burn, if that's what it took. The palace gates opened like the mouth of a beast. Obadiah walked through them alone. No guards, no servants, no fanfare. Just the sound of his own sandals scraping the stone. He passed the statues, the silent lions, the torches that flickered against marble walls that still held the echo of Jezebel's threats. He didn't blink, didn't hesitate, because he had walked this road before, but now he wasn't walking for survival. He was walking for truth. Inside, the halls were quieter than usual. Ahab had gone into hiding, his pride cracked after Elijah's fire. He hadn't spoken publicly in days. But Jezebel was louder than ever. The queen stood on the throne steps shouting orders, voice sharp as shattered glass. "Bring me the names!" she barked. "I want every last one. If they spoke the name of the Lord, they die." Obadiah stepped forward, steady. "Then start with mine." The room stopped. Jezebel turned slowly. For a moment she said nothing. Then she laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. "You?" Obadiah nodded once. "I feared the Lord when no one else did. I kept his servants alive, and I'm not hiding anymore." The court gasped. A soldier stepped forward, hand on his sword. But Jezebel raised a hand. "No," she said, voice slow and cold. "Let him speak. Let's see what loyalty sounds like before it bleeds." Obadiah stood taller. "I served this house for years. I never stole. I never lied, except to keep your hands from innocent blood. I've seen prophets cry out in caves. I've seen children starve while you worshipped idols made of gold." Jezebel's face darkened. Obadiah took one step closer. "But I also saw fire fall from heaven. I saw the rain return. I saw the people fall on their faces and remember the name they forgot." He paused and said quietly, "You lost, Jezebel. Not because of Elijah, because truth doesn't bow to thrones." Silence. "Then take him," Jezebel hissed. The guards moved. But before they reached him, an earthquake rumbled beneath their feet. The pillars shook, a torch fell, and a crack split the wall beside the throne. Everyone froze, even Jezebel. Obadiah didn't move. He whispered only one thing as dust fell from the ceiling. "You can threaten the servant, but you can't stop the master." Obadiah was imprisoned that night. No trial, no sentence, just a dark cell. But he was at peace because the caves were emptied, the prophets were scattered, the word of God had been spoken in fire and in faithfulness. And Obadiah had carried it when no one else dared. Years passed. Jezebel would fall, Ahab would fall. The palace would crumble, but tucked in the pages of Scripture, there remains a single name, Obadiah. He wasn't crowned, he wasn't cheered, but he was remembered. Because in the darkest court of the darkest kingdom, he stood tall and never stopped fearing the Lord.